When Roboute Guilliman assumed command of the 13th Legion in the 4th solar decade of the Great Crusade, following his rediscovery in 837 M30, he set about transforming the Legion into a precise and powerful instrument of war. Under his leadership, the Ultramarines rapidly ascended in strength, with a track record of nearly uninterrupted success across the eastern sector of the galaxy. The Legion's disciplined structure proved effective in allowing it to expand with an unparalleled speed, liberating human-settled worlds and solidifying its control over the fledgling realm of Ultramar. For more than 50 years, the Ultramarines had waged successful compliance actions, expanding their reach ever more into distant regions. By 899 M30, their ranks had approximately grown to 166,000 Astartes, positioning them as one of the largest Space Marine legions, though they had not reached the scale of the other older legions. During this time, the Dark Angels, once the largest and most powerful of the legions, had suffered significant losses, in particular after the third Rangdang Xenocide. This event, in which 50,000 of their own had perished in a desperate struggle to prevent the annihilation of the northern sector of the Imperium, had reduced their numbers substantially, leaving the Ultramarines to surpass them in sheer manpower and general applicable strength. Despite their increase in size and power, Roboute Guilliman was not content to rest on his laurels. Though his legion had indeed flourished, he was haunted by the shadow of the past failures of the Legion, in particular, the Eurydice Cluster Rebellion, a disastrous campaign that had occurred prior to his reunion with the Ultramarines. Under the leadership of the previous Legion Master, the Ultramarines had suffered a catastrophic defeat at the hands of the Osirian Simmered. This was a terrifying and macabre xenospecies, and the defeat had cast a long shadow over the Legion as a whole, one that lingered in the psyche of both surviving warriors and new recruits who joined their ranks. The loss was never openly discussed, but it weighed particularly heavy upon all those of the Legion. The utter stain of the Eurydice cluster had left a mark on their identity, one that could not easily be erased. For Roboute Guilliman, the only way to purge the Legion of this lingering shame would be to confront directly the Osirian Simmered and destroy them utterly, completely, and totally. Since finding out about the defeat, the Primarch had devoted himself to studying the aftermath, poring over battle logs, gun piercer footage, and even fragmented Auspex data retrieved from surviving warships. The Ultramarines' ongoing series of compliance actions allowed Guilliman to hone his strategies, analyzing and refining the theoretical battle scenarios against this particular Xenos threat and all others to come, preparing for the day that they would inevitably resurface. But the years passed, and the Osirian Simmered did not return. Of course, there were rumors, unsettling though they may be, of reports passed down from rogue traders and frontier scouts. These tales spoke of inexplicable massacres, entire settlements disappearing without a trace, and only remnants of destruction being left behind. Yet, as with so many stories across the galaxy, the evidence for it was often fragmented and inconclusive, sometimes even pointing to others, said others being more familiar and constant threats. The galaxy was a vast and unpredictable place, filled with countless, unending dangers. The Simmered, though feared, remained an elusive and rather mysterious presence in the stories whispered about in the shadows of the Imperium's frontiers. Despite these unsolved mysteries, Guilliman remained steadfast, as he knew one day the Osirian Simmered would return, and when they did, the Ultramarines would be ready. Eventually, the Battle of Eurydice Terminal, a conflict which would, in later years, define this long-awaited reckoning, would occur, but it was only a matter of time. As the Ultramarines continued their campaigns across the galaxy, expanding their influence, supply lines, and overall military power, the memory of the Eurydice Cluster Rebellion would forever stain their history. A scar, but one that their Primarch was determined to erase, allowing his legion to be shaped not by the past, but by their present and the potential for humanity's future. For the next 26 standard years, the fate of the Osirian Simmered remained an open question, one haunting the records of the Great Crusade, a puzzle without a resolution. Their last recorded engagement had been the disastrous Eurydice Cluster Rebellion, and the battle that had left the Ultramarines with an unhealed wound. Reports of their resurgence were often little more than whispers and unsubstantiated accounts from rogue traders. It would not be until the world of Maxilla Vertis which was near the swirling nightmare of the Maelstrom, that the first tangible evidence of the Cybrids' return was uncovered. By that time, the Ultramarines had their fast cruisers arriving. However, when they had actually arrived, the trail had gone cold, and the world itself was found dead, its surface scoured as a grim reminder of the passage of something beyond mortal comprehension. No survivors, no transmissions, no lingering battle signatures, only complete and utter devastation, in a manner that was eerily reminiscent of the Cybrids, an enemy who was known to leave nothing in their wake. But it would be in the final months of 899 M30 that confirmation of an undeniable reality, a rather chilling one, finally reached the ears of Roboute Guilliman. The report relayed through the astropathic chamber of Terra was unlike any the Primarch had yet received. It came not from his own legion, but a subfleet of the 12th, the infamous Warhounds, in the last days before their transformation into something far more brutal. The fleet had been under the command of Praetor Erod Krug, and it had been operating on the southwestern fringes of the Crusade's reach, near the Eurydice Terminal, a desolate frontier region marked by warring void empires, pirate raiders, and uncharted horrors. The Warhounds had found themselves embroiled in a brutal struggle against an orc fleet of the vast Glortan Empire, a savage warband from the abyssal gulfs beyond Imperial star charts. Outnumbered and beset on all sides, the Warhounds' fleet relied upon their characteristic ferocity, employing relentless void ship boarding actions, along with punishing ground assaults were all used in order to keep the orcs at bay from securing a foothold on the surface of the world. On the surface, the conflict itself was reaching a fever pitch when something wholly unexpected appeared. A third force entered the brouhaha, a force which would attack both sides. The Warhounds, being the genetically engineered warriors they were, relentlessly pursued them for slaughter. But now, instead of just fighting the orcs, they were fighting on two fronts for their very survival. Vox transmissions grew panicked, and data records became fragmented, as the ferocity of the battle escalated into something that defied all rationale. And then, without warning, all communication ceased. When the Ultramarines' retribution fleet arrived, even Guilliman and his formidable mind could not have foreseen what awaited them. The Eurydice Terminal had become a charnel house of complete and total devastation. The void was left littered with shattered warships, hulks bearing the unmistakable scarring of energy weapons unlike any standard Xenos. The remnants of the Orcs fleet left adrift in ruin, their once crude but effective voidcraft turned into nothing more than twisted metal and dying embers. But it was the remnants of the 12th that sent a chill up the Ultramarines' ranks. This was a force that had once numbered in thousands, reduced to a mere handful of hundreds. The survivors were bloodied and battered, standing amongst the wreckage of what had once been a vast Imperial victory force. At their head, still standing despite grievous and what to most Astartes would be mortal wounds, Erod, a warrior who had been known for a will of iron from deep within, now bore a body with savage rents of blade and bolt alike. His armor was in essence shattered, but his presence was unbroken. He had witnessed firsthand the thing that had turned a war zone into a slaughterhouse. Whatever force had intervened in their battle left no trace of itself, took no prisoners, no debris, no bodies, only insurmountable ruin. A ruin which the Ultramarines quickly understood could only be caused by the Cybrids, and they knew that they now had returned with a vengeance. With that knowledge in mind, the Ultramarines went on to collect information, and so a battle-hardened Warhound's Praetor, his armor still rather scarred and damaged from the slaughter at Eurydice, recounted to Roboute Guilliman directly a tale that seemed to defy even the horrors of the Great Crusade. The Osirian Cybrids had indeed returned, not merely as a lurking threat, but as a force wielding an insidious and terrifying weapon, something that allowed them to completely subdue the minds of their enemies through sheer psychic dominance, which had led them to enslave an entire feral orc horde, turning the brutish warriors against their own kind and setting them upon the defenders of Eurydice. It was a battle not fought only in flesh and steel, but in the unseen realm of the Imperium, a realm of thought, will, and spirit. This was a war that had nearly shattered the 12th Legion. The Warhounds alone had resisted the Cybrids' control, all thanks to the sheer aggression and the uncompromising willpower that had been derived from their genetic makeup. This unexpected shield against psychic enslavement had been the only reason that they had survived in any number, especially after their human compatriots had been turned. But their defiance had come at a terrible cost. Massively outnumbered and relentlessly besieged, they had to bleed for every inch of ground they would hold. Their once mighty numbers had been reduced to a few hundred shattered warriors, though at this point it would be more apt to call them survivors. Their fate would have been sealed had the system not descended into a deeper chaos. What came next was something no tactician and no Primarch could have foreseen. The entirety of the greenskin Glorten Empire, a warband beyond estimation, descended upon the Eurydice Terminal in a tide of unrelenting fury. But something was different, even for the orcs. Their rage seemed unnatural, almost as if it was genetically programmed into them. Their ferocity sharpened to an unbearable edge. They fought as if possessed by an ancient spirit, something far grander and more dangerous than the orcs of today. This was more than just instinct that bound them to slaughter. Then the truth was revealed. Cybrid void ships emerged from the cold, dark emptiness of space, their hourglass vessels disgorging thousands upon thousands of enslaved warriors, not just orcs, but alien species unknown to even the most complete of Imperial war records. The Eurydice Terminal had become more than just a battlefield. It had become a multi-pronged vortex of destruction, a place where entire civilizations would be drawn in to die. This is a battle to which Guilliman and the Ultramarines had come. Assessing the grim reality before them, the Primarch of the 13th wasted no time. The sheer scale of the battle had transformed into something completely unprecedented. With 100,000 Ultramarines under his command left, Guilliman determined to see his legion claim victory where the Warhounds had only found a ruin. Arad, despite his wounds, made one final request for his surviving legionaries to be extracted from the wreckage and granted a place in the battle itself. But Guilliman, for some reason or another, would deny him. This was to be the Ultramarines' war, a reckoning that belonged to his warriors and his warriors alone. And so he formulated a plan, one that was both swift and brutal in its execution. Unlike anything Guilliman had attempted before, there would be no long-range bombardment, no careful encirclement, no drawn-out fleet engagement. Instead, the Ultramarines would strike at the enemy's heart with overwhelming numbers and an unrelenting force. The order would be given. Like a blade thrust into the enemy's guts, the Ultramarines' fleet plunged directly into the heart of the Cybrid's armada. Void shields blazing, escort ships maneuvering with a mathematical precision. All the while, the 13th Legion committed itself to an all-out boarding assault. Tens of thousands of Space Marines surged into their drop bays, their weapons primed, their war cries echoing across the decks into the void. Guilliman had chosen a strategy not of attrition, but of total and immediate devastation. And so, the Battle of Eurydice Terminal began anew. It is not without irony that Roboute Guilliman himself, in later testimony, would reflect on this moment, the Battle of Eurydice Terminal, as proof that the Ultramarines were not a legion adverse to costly, high-risk warfare. Indeed, history had often framed them as methodical and precise, as masters of warfare through efficiency rather than expenditure of lives. And yet here, at the heart of the Cybrid fleet, that notion was irrevocably shattered. For Guilliman was no stranger to sacrifice. He merely saw no virtue in waste. But when the only path for victory was through fire and blood, when the survival of the Imperium itself necessitated the loss of warriors, the 13th Legion would pay the price without hesitation, without regret, and without mercy. The Ultramarines' wrath was now unleashed, as an avalanche of ceramite and fire, as the Legion descended upon the Cybrid's vessels. Hundreds of gunships and assault rams erupted from the hangar bays, spearheading the attack with lance batteries and macro cannons, their firepower scattering the void in great gouts of green light. The Cybrid nomad ships would retaliate with their own esoteric weaponry, lashing out at the Ultramarines' fleet with frenzied arcs of their own elemental weaponry. Strange and unknowable forces warping the very fabric of reality. Hulls buckled, ships burned. The Ultramarines' assault was overwhelming. Through the labyrinthian corridors of the Cybrid's vessels, shifting networks that pulsed like veins of some ancient dying colossus, the warriors of the 13th advanced with merciless precision. Invictati veteran warriors wielding axe and shield led the charge, their disciplined ranks pushing through the chaotic interior. Behind them, the unbreakable bulwarks of Terminator-clad warriors followed up, moving like living siege engines and forcing the ship's defenders back step by step. It was then that the Cybrids revealed their true nature, no longer hidden behind the carapace of their exo-armor. The creatures emerged from the darkness, their ghoulish forms insubstantial, half-solid specters with eyes that burned like dying embers. Gaunt and emaciated, yet brimming with psychokinetic fury, they struck with invisible, mind-searing blasts. Their very thoughts had become weapons against flesh and steel, and yet still the Ultramarines pressed on. For every legionary felled, a dozen more surged forward in his place. The Ultramarines were using their vast numbers to overwhelm their enemies, something that the traitors would recognize much later. Something the traitors would recognize during their heresy, and act in order to prevent them from being properly utilized to counter their forces. This was no longer a simple conquest, but a battle for overall, complete and total vengeance. A reckoning long overdue. The scars of the Osiris cluster ran deep, and in the cold void above Eurydice Terminal, they were being paid in full. The Cybrids were corralled, their forces cornered and crushed, their defenses mined with melta-bombs and automatic implosion charges, as the Ultramarines systematically dismantled their ship from the inside out. The 13th Legion had been patient. They had waited for this moment. Now the hour of reckoning was at hand, and the Ultramarines had come not just to take their pound of flesh, but to carve vengeance straight from their enemies' corpses. And the Cybrids would not be able to escape their fate. It would be Roboute Guilliman himself who breached the innermost sanctum of the largest hourglass ship, striding into the heart of the Cybrid domain to confront the master of these vile Xenos scum. What awaited him there was a creature beyond mortal comprehension, a towering multi-limbed gestalt, thrice the height of the Primarch, and with its elongated limbs and equine skull splitting the air with a scream that shattered ceramite and sent lesser warriors reeling in agony. Even Guilliman's Terminator honor guard faltered, but the Primarch would not hesitate. Beside him stood Aroth Ptolemy, chief battle psyker of the Ultramarines, his mind locked in a battle against the entity's monstrous will. Where Guilliman struck with blade and fury, Ptolemy waged a war on the psychic plane, pouring his every reserve of power into shielding his Primarch from the Cybrid King's assault. The alien lord reared up, its many-clawed appendages brandishing arcane weapons, shapes twisted and cruel, relics of some forgotten devil god of old night. But Guilliman, forged by the Emperor's unmatched arts, was faster. With a devastating strike, he cleaved the creature apart, limb from vaporous limb. The Xenos Lord lashed out in desperation. In its death throes, it launched a final catastrophic surge of psychic power. It was then that the battle psyker, already drained and dying, made his final stand. The chief psyker's mind became an absolute shield, absorbing the full force of the Cybrid King's last desperate attack, his very essence unraveling beneath the strain. Yet he held firm, sacrificing his life, along with the very essence of his soul, so that Guilliman might endure. And endure he did. The Cybrid King fell, its thrashing, collapsing form left in ruins, and Guilliman, standing amidst the wreckage, enacted his legion's vengeance. Reaching down, he tore the luminous brain from the beast's shattered skull, holding it aloft as a symbol of his dominion. Then, with the finality of a conqueror, he crushed it beneath his heel. The hourglass vessels of the Cybrids, great and terrible constructs that had once prowled the stars, began to die. Not only had their commander been killed, but they had been torn apart from within by the detonations of Ultramarine demolition charges. Others, in their panic, attempted to flee, only to be shattered in the crossfire of the awaiting 13th Legion. There was no escape. And with the death of their masters, so too did the slave armies on Eurydice Terminal began to falter. The orcs of the Gortanian Empire, once bound in the thrall of the Cybrid overlords, now turned upon one another in an anarchistic slaughter, their warlust now unchecked and unrestrained. Though their numbers had been terribly reduced, the Ultramarines did not relent. With a cold, methodical precision, they drove the last of the greenskins into the void, scattering them into the uncharted areas of the abyss. The battle was now over. The blood price had been steep. Several thousand legionaries had become casualties, many of them Terran-born veterans, warriors who had once fought to prove their place within Guilliman's legion. They had sought to atone for the past with their zeal, and many had died doing so, but theirs was a sacrifice that that had been given willingly, and the halls of Ultramar would remember their sacrifice in honor, for the Ultramarines had claimed their vengeance, and they would be willing to pay the price again should the Imperium ever demand it. The next event of galactic scale that the Ultramarines would take part in would be the compliance on Trasis, circa 900 M30. The world of Trasis was a strategically located planet in the expanding Imperium, and it became a site for a pivotal Imperial compliance action led by the Ultramarines Legion in the early years of their newfound glory. While the exact circumstances of the initial conflict remain unclear, it is known that the Ultramarines were sent to secure the world against unknown assailants, forces that presented formidable challenges to the Legion's very might. As the battle raged on, an unexpected event occurred that would forever alter the course of the world's fate. Primarch Roboute Guilliman, who had led the assault personally, was attacked by a mysterious assailant. In a moment of peril, it was a native soldier of Trasis who had come to the Primarch's defense, saving him from certain death. The identity of this assailant remains unknown to this day, but the actions of the Trasian soldier left an unshakable mark on Guilliman's memory. In an extraordinary display of humility and honor, Guilliman bent the knee before the soldier, bowing a sacred oath to the world. He promised that should it ever need assistance in the future, the Ultramarines would answer the call without hesitation, and that the world was now under their personal protection. In gratitude for the intervention of Guilliman and his legion, the people of Trasis would rename the world Trasis Ultra, a tribute to the saviors who had not only secured their planet but also forged a bond that would last through the Great Crusade and beyond. The capital city of Erebus became home of one of the most significant cultural treasures in the Imperium, the Trasis fresco, an immense mosaic whose origins remain, like many things in the Imperium, shrouded in no small amount of mystery. Covered every surface of the temple walls, ceilings, and even the floors. It depicted the key events of the Great Crusade and immortalized the Ultramarines' role in the conquest and pacification of Trasis. The fresco remains a testament to the unbreakable bond between the Imperium and many of its new allies, solidifying Trasis Ultra's place in the Imperium's record books. In the 30th millennium, the Ultramarines, under the leadership of Primarch Roboute Guilliman, were in essence an unstoppable force, recording victories beyond measure, as Guilliman's remarkable efficiency as a strategist and tactician allowed the Ultramarines to liberate more human-settled worlds than any legion in the history of the Great Crusade. Now, this does not bar the fact that other legions conquered more worlds, but the action of liberating human colonies had not been outdone by any other. His ability to bringing worlds fully into compliance was in essence unparalleled, blending the might of his legion with his genius for governance, statecraft, and organization. Guilliman's brilliance was not only on display at this time, but it was also widely recognized even by his brothers, as many of them noted that he was able to establish stable and self-sufficient systems of governance across every world that he conquered. His logistical expertise ensured that the liberated planets thrived under imperial rule, with industry and trade set up to prosper and to not only benefit the populace, but the Legion itself. The strengths of the Ultramarines were actively recognized during this time, as not just a military power, but as a legion with a capability to leave behind an enduring, effective infrastructure, with a willing citizenry who would both maintain and expand it. However, this notoriety, while positive, would eventually come to cost them. This would be in no small part thanks to the next major event of galactic scale that the Ultramarines would take part in 964 M30, nearly 6 decades after the world of Kur had been brought into imperial compliance. A pivotal and catastrophic event would unfold that would shape one of the Emperor's most faithful legions, and in essence, cause one of the greatest catastrophes in humanity's history. Monarchia, the capital city of Kur, had become a living symbol of the word-bearer's devotion to the Emperor. It was known as the Perfect City, a grand monument for the belief that the Emperor was not just a sovereign of mankind, but a living god. A belief that was strictly against the imperial truth that the Emperor had been so obsessed with the spread of. This adherence to religious faith and idolatry, which had been perpetrated by the word-bearers, was seen as a grievous violation of the imperial doctrine, and since it had been done by one of the Emperor's sons, the Emperor would have to react more harshly than if lesser men had. In response to this growing heresy, the Emperor himself issued a direct command ordering the Ultramarines leadership under the command of Roboute Guilliman to destroy Monarchia and make an example of the city and its people. Guilliman's forces leveled the city, eradicating this living symbol of Lorgar's rebellion, raising Monarchia and crushing the morale of the wordbearers, leading them to question their faith in the Emperor and to turn their gaze towards darker powers. The destruction of their perfects was what ultimately led Lorgar and his legion down the irreversible path of corruption as they went on to seek out new gods, who would be the ruinous powers of chaos, prompting a devastating shift in the trajectory of not only the Great Crusade, but of humanity as a whole. This destruction was a defining moment in the conflict between the Emperor's vision of a united humanity under a fully atheistic scientific form of governance and rebellious forces within his own legions. It served as a grim reminder that even the most devout adherents to the imperial truth would not be spared should they fail to uphold its principles. Up next would be the compliance of Dwell. In 976 M30, the world of Dwell was settled during the Dark Age of technology by colonists from the mysterious and long-lost world of Moloch, and it became the site of an imperial compliance action led by none other than Primarch Roboute Guilliman. Dwell was a world rich with knowledge and history, all of which was contained within vast repositories of data that would later play a pivotal role in the destiny of the Imperium. The world was rather isolated and resistant to the Emperor's rule. In essence, it was a relic of a bygone era, and its scientists would become the object of great interest to forces both within and without the Imperium. The compliance of Dwell marked yet another chapter in the Ultramarines' ongoing campaigns to reunite humanity under the Emperor's banner. While the specifics of the engagement remain rather obscured by time and imperial record-keeping, it is known that the planet's eventual compliance was a significant achievement, not just for its strategic value, but for the pivotal information it harbored. Information that would lead the corrupted Primarch, Horus, to the world of Moloch itself, where he would seek out answers about the Emperor's true power. The complexities of this event would become even more shrouded upon the return of Roboute Guilliman, because the impact of the knowledge uncovered on Dwell was one he knew could not be allowed to be found out by anybody else, lest he risk humanity going through another heresy. The next major event that the Ultramarines would take part in would be the triumph of Ulnar. In the final years of the 30th millennium, the Imperium of Man launched the Ulnar Crusade, a grand campaign to crush the Orc Empire, ruled by the warlord overlord Uruk. This vast Xenos-dominated domain had long stood as a blight upon the Emperor's grand design, a threat that could no longer be ignored. At its heart lay the capital world of Ulnar, the stronghold of the largest greenskin empire ever to be encountered during the Great Crusade. To bring the Orcs to heel, the Imperium committed a force of an unprecedented scale, the majority of multiple Space Marine legions, supported by a staggering 8 million Imperial Army troops, along with a colossal armada of Imperial warships and their nearly uncountable crew. This was no mere expedition, it was an extermination. The Ulnar Crusade would come to symbolize the zenith of the Great Crusade's ambitions, and the culmination of the Emperor's vast undertakings to reunite humanity's scattered dominions beneath his rule. And at its conclusion, the Orcs of Ulnar, perhaps the largest and greatest conflagration of greenskins ever defeated, even before the great cataclysm of the Third War for Armageddon, lay in absolute ruin. With this battle won, the Emperor declared his intention to return to Terra, entrusting the future of his great campaign to another. But the decision he made that day was a choice that would reshape destiny itself, and it would set in motion events that no one, not even he, could fully control. To command in his stead, the Emperor chose Horus Lupercal, Primarch of the Luna Wolves, and in the aftermath of the triumph at Ulnar, Horus was granted the newly minted title of Warmaster and Supreme Commander of the Great Crusade, with an authority over the ever-expanding expeditionary fleets of every Space Marine Legion and all the Primarchs. It was a position of unparalleled power, second only to the Emperor himself, making Horus first amongst equals. This announcement was met with applause and acclamation, but beneath the surface stirred tensions amongst the Primarchs. Some believed Guilliman Lord of the Ultramarines, was just as a servant of the honor, if not more so. Though Guilliman himself harbored no outward resentment, Horus perceived it as he would himself feel if their roles were reversed. It was there, in the celebrations of victory, that seeds for something far darker had been sown. The next major event for the Ultramarines would be the Tristis campaign, which occurred in 000 M31. The world of Tristis was part of a close alliance of multiple totalitarian human colonies known as the Conservation, and this world would be the site of one of the most complex and contentious Imperial compliance operations in the entire Great Crusade's history. The Conservation was a deeply entrenched system, surviving the Age of Strife purely through eugenics and rigidly imposed social divisions. The population of Tristis was a strictly stratified cluster of genetically modified humans, which some would seek to classify as abhumans. However, they were close enough to baseline humans to be counted within the standard, with most of its populace enslaved to the greater needs of their society, which in essence had developed into a highly militarized and isolated civilization. The Imperium sought to liberate the 11 billion true humans of Tristis, but the world's inhabitants were fiercely resistant to the Emperor's authority and responded quickly with violence before any proper negotiations could occur. The Conservation's leadership fired upon Imperial emissaries and quickly prepared for total war. Horus, now the Imperial Warmaster, tasked Roboute Guilliman and Alfarius of the Alpha Legion to bringing the world into compliance, while Guilliman immediately began to engage the outer worlds of the Conservation. Alfarius and his legion employed a more subtle strategy, sending probes and launching raids that would leave Tristis uncertain of the Alpha Legion's true intentions and their overall scope. Guilliman, frustrated with the lack of progress and the Alpha Legion's unconventional tactics, openly berated Alfarius, demanding that his legion emulate the more direct and efficient strategies employed by the Ultramarines. Despite this criticism, Alfarius remained steadfast in his methods, ultimately deploying his legion using their famed deceptive tactics rather than the Ultramarines' own. Through sabotage, infiltration, and intelligence gathering, the Alpha Legion brought Tristis' defenses to their knees. When the invasion finally came, it was swift, devastating, and relatively easy. The Tristis were already torn apart by a series of attacks from multiple directions, leaving their infrastructure and military in ruins. Eventually, the battle would culminate in the harrowing of Trista Prime, where the Alpha Legion's overwhelming force crushed the remaining resistance, and anarchy ensued within days, leading the planet's entire population to be decimated, with pestilence and famine following the wake of the battle. Approximately 90% of Tristis Prime's population was lost. The swift collapse of the world's regime was followed by the planet's immediate submission. However, the conduct of the Alpha Legion would not go unnoticed. Guilliman, appalled by the dishonorable tactics employed and the state the world was left in, protested to Horus, declaring that Alfarius' methods were unworthy of the Astartes. However, Horus would praise Alfarius for executing such a masterful campaign with minimal losses, leading to the differences between the Ultramarines and the Alpha Legion to remain a point of great contention for the rest of the Great Crusade, regardless of how short it would be. The next, and potentially one of the most notable events that the Ultramarines would be involved in, would be the Council of Nicaea, occurring in 001 M31. As the Great Crusade progressed, the growing presence of psychic phenomena across the galaxy posed a great concern to the Imperium. Numerous worlds fell under the thrall of mystics and sorcerers, some even harnessing the power akin to those wielded by the Thousand Suns Legion, led by their Primarch Magnus the Red. These individuals were feared and revered, for their abilities greatly surpassed those of ordinary humans, even at baser levels. But this misuse of power was not only dangerous, but deeply divisive. The use of sorcery threatened the very stability of the fledgling Imperium, creating an ideological rift between the legions of Astartes. This discord would reach a boiling point, prompting the Emperor to convene a conclave to resolve the matter once and for all. This would be the Council of Nicaea. It was called so due to occurring on the world of Nicaea, a neutral site set to determine whether psychic powers would be a boon or a dangerous liability to the legions of Astartes. This was not just a trial of doctrine, but also a trial of Magnus the Red, who stood accused of introducing sorcery into the ranks of the Space Marine legions, not only his, but others, through the creation of the Librarius. Eventually, after much arguing, the Emperor's decree was clear. While certain psychic functions, such as those wielded by the Navigators and Astropaths, would remain essential for the Imperium and allowed, their use would be tightly regulated. However, the unrestricted practice of sorcery would be officially banned. With the Librarians, those psychically gifted warriors of the Space Marine Legions disbanded under Imperial law. Magnus, ever defiant, withdrew to his home world of Prospero, continuing his study into the forbidden arts in secret. In time, this decision would become a pivotal turning point for the heresy, in particular when the Thousand Sons, feeling betrayed, would turn to the ruinous powers. After this, the next event would be the pacification of Ankarath, circa 004 through 007 M31. Captain Hector of the Ultramarines, leading 500 battle brothers, was tasked with a critical mission during the Great Crusade to free the population of Ankarath from the thrall of the alien-controlled Vectates. The Vectates had enslaved the human population under the power of an alien overmind, and their sorcery had been used to twist and influence humanity under a psychic dominion. This was no ordinary conflict, as the Ultramarines now found themselves fighting not just for Imperial compliance, but for the liberation of their fellow humans, who had been subject to unspeakable horrors. The campaign was brutal, but the Ultramarines' victory was a rather decisive one. Hector's forces not only liberated Ankarath, but also secured a vital supply of manpower from the local population, eager to serve the greater Imperial cause. Following this successful pacification, Captain Hector and his battle brothers would be dispatched to the Viridian system, where they would join forces with the Wordbearers on a large-scale campaign to eradicate the Orc warband of Geshach. The final preparations for this campaign, however, would soon be interrupted by the treachery of Lorgar Aurelian, Primarch of the Wordbearers, who had other plans for the Ultramarines. The Ultramarines, unaware of the treachery that awaited them, were caught completely off guard when the Wordbearers, under Lorgar's command, launched a surprise attack on the Ultramarine forces gathered in the Viridian system. Lorgar's forces, armed with the fury of the Abyss, obliterated Captain Hector's flagship, the Fist of Macragge, while it was en route to Calth, leading to a catastrophic loss for the Ultramarines. This attack would be a harrowing precursor to the greater conflict of the Horus Heresy, and it would lead to the horrors of Agrita, circa 004 M30. This would be another dark chapter in the Great Crusade's history, as the cleansing of this world was a brutal campaign against a technologically advanced human world that had refused to submit to the Emperor's rule. The world was held by an arrogant and isolationist populace who, upon receiving the Emperor's emissaries, responded by executing them in a public display of defiance. The world's military capabilities were indeed formidable, and its citizens prepared to fight to the death in order to preserve their independence. The Emperor's chosen instrument for this conquest was none other than the Warmaster, who, alongside his brothers, led a combined assault of Sons of Horus, World Eaters, and Ultramarines to pacify the world. The campaign was swift in its initial phases, but the final assault on the world's massive central citadel proved costly. The World Eaters, led by their Primarch Angron, were dispatched to breach the fortress and eliminate the leaders of the remaining resistance forces. What followed was nothing short of absolute carnage and butchery. Hundreds of World Eaters perished in this brutal siege, their rage consuming them as they fought to claim every inch of ground, as fiercely as the last. When the citadel finally fell, the World Eaters did not halt in their slaughter. Instead, they left the fortress as a blood-soaked charnel house, leaving no survivors amongst its defenders, not even those who had surrendered. By the time the Ultramarines arrived, the battle was effectively over, and the World Eaters had already departed. The Ultramarines, disgusted by this butchery and barbarity, would forever be incensed, were left to secure the world and prepare it for Imperial governance. Yet before Guilliman could address his concerns with Horus and Angron over their savage conduct, the Horus Heresy erupted in full, and both Horus and Angron turned against the Emperor, creating a rift between the Ultramarines and their once allied legions. As it seems, the horrors of Agrita's compliance became a foreshadowing of the betrayal to come, and Guilliman's worst fears slowly becoming reality.